By the time my husband asked me to smile a fourth time, the coffee had gone lukewarm in my hand and the sunlight in my father's hallway had already shifted an inch across the floorboards. It was our third anniversary, a mild Saturday in late September, and Grant was standing in the front room with his phone held up, frowning at me like the problem was not the lighting but the way I was inhabiting my own house. "Just one more," he said, and then smiled to soften it. "These are good. I just want one where you look at me." I was looking at him. That was the part that made my stomach tighten. There are small moments in a marriage that would sound foolish if you tried to explain them out loud. Nothing dramatic, nothing a friend would hear and say, "Leave him." Just a tone that lands 1 inch wrong, a hand at the small of your back steering you a little harder than necessary. A day that belongs to both of you somehow becoming something you are expected to perform correctly. I set my mug on the entry table beside the vase of grocery store roses he'd bought that morning and made myself smile again. The house still smelled faintly like cinnamon and old wood. My father used to say old houses carried seasons in their bones, and this one did. Even after 6 years without him, the place still held traces of October before October arrived. Dry air, dust warming in the sunlight, the sweet stale scent that rose from the hall closet when the furnace kicked on for the first time. He had left the house to me when he died, to my mother's quiet surprise and my own louder one. Not because I was the favorite. We were not that kind of family on paper. We were the kind who called things practical when they were personal. My younger brother Noah needed more help, my mother needed more patience, and I was the one people described as steady, which in my family had always meant available. Grant lowered his phone and came toward me, adjusting the collar of my cardigan with careful fingers. "This color washes you out a little," he said. "Do you want to change?" I looked down at the soft blue sweater I had had on since breakfast. For a few anniversary pictures in the hallway, he gave a short laugh like I was being cute on purpose. "For pictures we might actually frame, yeah." He kissed my forehead after he said it, and because he kissed my forehead after he said it, I almost hated myself for feeling hurt. That had been the shape of our marriage more often than I like to admit. Grant was not a loud man. He did not slam doors or throw words like plates. He corrected. He refined. He made things smoother. In the first year, I had mistaken that for steadiness, the kind of male calm my family did not do well. My mother loved him for it. Noah loved him because Grant never sounded openly disappointed in him the way my father sometimes had. And I had loved him because next to the noise of my family, he felt like a clean room. I went upstairs and changed into a cream blouse, then stood in the bedroom for a moment looking at the unmade bed and the laundry basket at the foot of it full of towels I had meant to fold before dinner. The ordinary shape of the day comforted me. We had plans that evening. My mother and Noah were coming over for dinner, which was not exactly how I would have chosen to spend our anniversary, but my mother had said the week got away from her and Noah was working odd hours again and couldn't. Sunday, and Grant had shrugged and said, "It's fine, we'll do our own thing after." He said it so easily that refusing had felt petty. When I came back downstairs, he took more pictures in the dining room by the front window on the porch steps where the mums I'd bought from the hardware store sat in black plastic pots I still had not repotted. He wanted one in the kitchen too, with me leaning against the counter and him beside me. At one point, he looked around and moved the ceramic bowl by the door, the one my mother had given me after my father died, the one I kept keys in 2 inches to the left. "It photographs better there," he said. I told myself again that this was normal, that some people just cared more about pictures than others. My father had taken photos like he was trying to catch life before it noticed him. Half of them were blurry. Nobody was centered. Somebody was usually blinking or chewing. Grant liked things composed. That was all. By noon, I had chicken roasting in the oven with carrots and onions, a pan of cornbread cooling by the stove, and a pecan pie from Miller's Bakery sitting in its box near the microwave because I had not had the energy to bake from scratch after a week of parent-teacher conferences. I taught 7th grade art at the middle school 2 miles away, and by Friday afternoons, I usually felt like I had been sanded down around the edges by litter, noise, and children who said brutal things by accident. Grant worked in commercial insurance and liked to say my job was noble in the same tone people use for hospice volunteers and underpaid public defenders. Around 3, while he was outside hosing down the porch because he had decided a little dust would show in the photos if we took any more at sunset, I started clearing the desk in the small room off the kitchen that had once been my father's den. It was where we kept household papers, now tax envelopes, insurance renewals, appliance manuals, the receipt from when the water heater had been replaced last winter. I was stacking a pile to move into the drawer when a clipped packet slid sideways and landed near my wrist. At first, I noticed only that it was thicker than the rest. Then I saw my address typed at the top and my parcel number beneath it. I thought maybe it was some assessment notice I had forgotten to open, but the wording in the middle made me stop. Proposed occupancy adjustment. I frowned and pulled the first page closer. There were lines about current use, intended household structure, and supporting residency information. My house. My father's house. A draft not official but written in the kind of language people use when they are already farther into something than they want you to know. I read the phrase twice before I heard the back door open and Grant's footsteps in the kitchen. "What's that?" he asked. I looked up. He had the hose still in one hand, water darkening the front of his jeans near the knee. "This," I said, lifting the pages slightly. "Why is there a draft about occupancy changes for this address?" He paused only a second. "Oh, that. He came closer and set the hose nozzle on the counter beside the sink. "Your mom asked me a question a few weeks ago about whether there were options if Noah needed a stable address for a while. I printed something out to look at, that's all. It doesn't mean anything." The unease that had been moving around in me all day seemed to settle finally in one place. "Why didn't you mention it to me?" He dried his hands with the dish towel hanging from the oven handle, though they were barely wet, "Because it was nothing, Lena. I didn't want to turn a hypothetical into a whole stressful conversation." I looked back at the paper. "Why is it in with our house documents?" "Because that's where house-related papers go." He said it gently, almost amused. That was what made it hard. If he had snapped, I would have had somewhere clean to put my anger. Instead, I felt myself start doing what I always did, rearranging his words into the kindest possible version. Before I could answer, my mother's car pulled into the driveway. Noah's old Civic came behind her, one headlight still cloudy from the fender bender he'd never fully repaired. Through the front window, I watched my mother get out with a foil-covered dish in both hands, though I had told her I already had dinner handled. Noah came slower, shoulders hunched, one hand in his hoodie pocket like he was already bracing for a conversation he hoped somebody else would manage for him. Grant reached for the papers in my hand. "Can we not do this right now?" I did not let go immediately. He lowered his voice. "Please, it's our anniversary." It was such a strange sentence that for a second I almost laughed. Instead, I handed him the packet because my mother was at the front door and because I had spent most of my life learning how quickly a woman can become the problem in a room just by choosing the wrong moment not to be agreeable. Dinner started the way dinners with my family always started, with too much effort, pretending nobody had brought any tension in with them. My mother said the house looked beautiful and touched the roses like she had sent them herself. Noah said the chicken smelled great and opened the fridge without asking, looking for a beer he had not brought. Grant took my mother's casserole dish and told her she shouldn't have, and she said, "For family, I never mind," in that soft way she had that made everything sound like a blessing even when it was pressure. We ate in the dining room because Grant had insisted earlier that it would feel more special. The late sun came through the side windows in long gold bands. The anniversary flowers sat between the salt and pepper shakers. One of the photo envelopes from the drugstore printer was tucked near the buffet, waiting for us to look through later, and every time I glanced at it, I felt an odd irritation I couldn't yet explain. For the first 10 minutes, conversation stayed ordinary. School, gas prices, whether Noah's manager was cutting hours again. Then my mother set her fork down and looked at me with the kind expression she used when she was about to ask for something she had already emotionally decided I would give. "I was telling Grant," she said, "how proud your father would be of the way you've handled this house." I smiled automatically. "Thanks, Mom." "No, really." Her voice warmed. "Most girls your age would have sold it by now and taken something easier. But you've always understood what matters." Beside me, Grant said nothing. He just took a sip of water. Noah rubbed the back of his neck and gave a small laugh. "Yeah, Lena's always been the stable one." There it was again, that family word. Stable, as if it were praise and not assignment. My mother glanced at Noah, then back at me. "And that's why I know you'll hear this the right way." The room did not get louder. If anything, it went quieter. The refrigerator motor hummed in the kitchen. A truck passed outside. I felt my own pulse in my throat. "Hear what I asked?" Grant finally spoke then in that soothing, measured voice of his. "Your mom just means we've all been thinking about practical options." Practical options. My mother folded her hands beside her plate. "Your father always wanted the house to stay a blessing to the family, Lena." I looked at Grant. He was not looking at me. He was looking at my mother, nodding once the way he did when clients on speakerphone said something sensitive and he wanted them to feel heard. Noah leaned forward. "It's not like anybody's asking you to do something crazy." I do not remember the exact next few sentences, only the shape of them. My mother calling me generous before I had agreed to anything. Noah talking about temporary arrangements with the confidence of someone already standing in a doorway. Grant using phrases like everybody loves you and nobody wants this to feel heavy and let's just talk it through. By the time pie came out, I felt as though my own anniversary dinner had turned into a room where a decision about my life was being politely rehearsed in front of me. After they left, my mother kissed my cheek and told me to think with my heart, which in my family had always meant in everyone else's favor. Noah hugged me one-armed and said, "You know I'd do the same for you," which was almost tender enough to be insulting. Grant locked the front door behind them and exhaled like the hard part of the evening had been managing me. I went into the kitchen without speaking and started clearing plates. He followed me quiet for a minute, then said, "I know that wasn't ideal." I laughed once under my breath. Not ideal. He leaned against the counter. They approached it badly. That doesn't mean the conversation itself is unreasonable. I turned toward him. You knew. He held my gaze. I knew they wanted to talk tonight. That's not what I mean. A small shadow crossed his face, then not guilt exactly. Annoyance at precision. Lena, he said I was trying to keep things calm. I did not answer. I carried the pie plates into the den instead because the dishwasher tabs were in the desk drawer and I needed one more ordinary task to keep from crying in front of him. The clipped packet was back on the desk. I do not know whether he had put it there on purpose or carelessly or because he no longer felt he had to hide it much. I picked it up again, this time angrier, and that was when I noticed there was something behind the draft pages I had not seen before. 3 printed emails clipped to the back. The first line I read was my husband's name. The second was the timestamp. It was from 9 days earlier. I stood there with the papers in my hands long enough for the room to change shape around me. The den had always been the smallest room in the house, but it never used to feel cramped. My father had kept a roll-top desk against the wall beneath the window, and even after I turned the room into a place for bills and school folders and printer paper, I had left the desk where it was. The wood still held the faint lemon oil smell he used every fall. There was a dent in the right corner from where he used to set down his coffee mug too hard when the Browns were losing. I had loved that desk because it made the room feel anchored. That night with Grant in the kitchen and 3 printed emails in my hands, it felt like standing in the one part of the house that still knew how to tell the truth. The first email was from Grant to someone at the county title office. The tone of it was neat, respectful, and careful in the way all his work emails were careful. He was asking about options for occupancy documentation and future transfer sequencing in a situation where the current titled owner is amenable but prone to emotional delay when approached too early. I read that line twice. Amenable but prone to emotional delay. He was writing about me the way people write about a weather issue or a nervous client. Not even difficult, just something to route around. The second email was a reply asking for the parcel number and clarifying whether any formal change of title was being proposed. Grant had sent the parcel number 12 minutes later. The third was from 2 days after that, asking what paperwork should be prepared for a family conversation next weekend so everyone could move efficiently if consensus is reached. Next weekend. Our anniversary. I heard Grant's footsteps behind me before I turned around. He stopped in the doorway when he saw what was in my hands. For the first time all day, he did not immediately have a tone ready. "How long have you had those?" I asked. He looked at the papers, not at me. "Lena, how long?" His shoulders rose and fell once. "A couple weeks." The words landed so quietly that for a second I could not feel them. Then I could feel them everywhere. "You called them hypothetical. They were hypothetical when your mom first brought it up." I laughed, but there was no air in it. "You sent my parcel number." He stepped into the room, then hands open the way he did when he wanted to make himself look unthreatening. Because I was trying to understand what was and wasn't possible before dragging you into something messy. Dragging me into it. I stared at him. I loved him long enough in that moment to feel exactly where it ended. "You wrote that I was amenable but prone to emotional delay." His face tightened almost imperceptibly. "That is not what I meant by that. It's what you wrote. You're reading it in the worst possible light. The thing about men like Grant is that they do not lie with force. They lie by offering you a version of events that sounds so much more civilized than the truth that objecting makes you feel unstable. I had spent 3 years taking the bait, not because I was weak, because I had been trained long before I married him to think composure meant safety, and that if everyone else sounded reasonable, the hurt must be coming from somewhere immature inside me. My mother used to use that voice when Noah forgot a bill or wrecked a car or borrowed money he could not return on time. "He's overwhelmed, Lena. He didn't mean it that way." You're the one who can handle things without making them ugly. I'd heard some version of that since I was 15 and Noah was 13, and my father came home from a double shift to find that Noah had dented the truck and I had already swept the broken taillight plastic from the driveway so Dad would not step on it in the dark. Dad had looked at me with that tired face of his and said, "You should not always be the one cleaning up first." At the time I thought he meant chores. Standing in his den with my husband watching me over my own pain, I understood he had meant much more than that. Grant moved closer. "I know how this looks." "No," I said. "I don't think you do." His expression changed then, not into cruelty exactly, but into effort. He was working harder now, recalibrating. "Your mother is scared for Noah," he said. "He is in over his head. You know that. We were trying to figure out something stable before it turned into another crisis." I was trying to help. I looked down at the email again. Future transfer sequencing. "You were trying to help her," I said. "Not me." He inhaled through his nose. "Why do you always make that distinction like family is some separate thing from your life?" The sentence was so clean and so unfair that it almost impressed me. Because that was the real trick of it. If I drew a boundary, I was the one dividing the family. If they crossed one, they were just being close. I set the papers on the desk very carefully because I did not want my hands shaking in front of him. "Did you plan the photo day because of this?" He blinked. "What? The pictures?" "Today. All of it. Did you?" He stared at me a second too long. "That is ridiculous." Maybe it was. Maybe it should have been. But once the idea entered the room, it did not leave. The pressed shirt he had laid out without asking if I wanted it. The way he had moved the ceramic bowl and straightened the frames and told me my sweater washed me out. The drugstore photo envelope waiting beside the buffet like proof we had been happy right up until the moment they started deciding what I should surrender. I picked up the emails again. "I need space. Lena, I mean it." He did something then he had never done before in a fight. He did not try to follow me. He stood still and let me go upstairs with the papers in my hand. That was worse. I slept in the guest room with the lamp on and my father's old quilt pulled up to my chin, though I had long ago told myself I was too old to need childhood textures when I was upset. Around 2 in the morning, I heard Grant open our bedroom door, pause, then close it again. He did not come check on me. He did not knock. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan and remembered the day after Dad's funeral, when my mother had sat at the same house's kitchen table with her hair unwashed and her voice scraped raw and said, "I don't know how to do this without you helping." She had been talking to me, not Noah. I had been 21. I remembered feeling needed and burdened in the same breath and hating myself for resenting it. That was the thing I never admitted out loud. Silence had not only come from fear. Sometimes it came from identity. If I stopped being the person who could bear more, who was I in this family at all? The next morning, Grant had already left for a run by the time I came downstairs. The house felt overclean, as if he had wiped counters while I slept. The anniversary flowers were still on the dining table. One rose had already started to brown at the edge. The photo envelope sat beside the fruit bowl where we had left it, thick and bright and wrong. I made coffee I did not want and called the county office when they opened at 9. The woman who answered transferred me twice before I got a title clerk named Dana Keller. Her voice was low, brisk, and unsentimental. "I have a question," I said, and then stopped because the question sounded pathetic in my own throat. I started again. "I found emails regarding my address and parcel number. My husband appears to have contacted your office about transfer and occupancy questions. I need to understand what exactly he asked for and whether anything formal was started." There was a small silence, the sound of keys clicking. "Can I have the parcel number?" she asked. I read it to her off the paper. More clicking. Then another pause, longer this time. "Ms. Bishop, yes. You're the titled owner." "Yes. And you did not authorize your husband to speak on your behalf." My fingers tightened around the phone. "No." "All right." Her tone stayed professional, but something in it shifted a degree warmer, or maybe just more careful. "There is no completed filing. Let me say that first. But there are documented inquiries associated with your address, including questions about possible transfer structures and supporting residency documentation." I closed my eyes. "Did he identify himself as my representative?" "He identified himself as your husband." "Not representative, husband," as if that covered the distance between me and consent. I sank onto one of the kitchen chairs. "Was my mother involved?" "I can't speculate beyond the correspondence in front of me," she said. "But I can tell you the inquiries were not random. Whoever was asking had enough parcel information and enough understanding of your situation to be exploring a specific path." Specific path. I stared at the anniversary flowers until they blurred. Miss Bishop, Dana said after a moment. If you are not participating willingly in any proposed change, do not sign anything placed in front of you casually. If you want, I can note in the file that all contacts should go directly through you. My throat tightened hard enough to hurt. Please do that. I already have. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time with my hands still wrapped around the phone. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, someone was mowing their lawn. The ordinariness of the sound almost broke me. Because the truth had not come in with sirens or shouting. It had come with phrasing. With a husband using a reasonable tone to take small steps around my participation. With a family dinner built so politely that objecting to it made me look like the sharp one. I went into the dining room and picked up the photo envelope. The prints were glossy and slightly oversaturated the way drugstore photos always are. In the first one, Grant had his arm around my waist on the porch and I was smiling up at him with the open, easy face I only had in pictures taken before I knew something. In another, we were standing in the hallway beneath the framed snapshot my father took of me at 16. Holding a paint roller, my cheeks streaked white because I had tried to help repaint the guest room and made a mess of it. Grant looked handsome, composed, devoted even. The kind of husband strangers would trust on sight. It hit me so suddenly I had to sit down. He had wanted these now. Not someday, not eventually, not when life calmed down. Now, more right before this. A clean visual record, a smiling wife in the house, proof of tenderness, proof of order, something polished enough to survive whatever came next. I remembered him adjusting my sleeve, telling me to change my sweater, moving the bowl by the door. Not because any of that alone meant betrayal, but because all of it had happened inside a day he already knew was not simply ours. That was the moment I lost the marriage. Not when I read the emails. Not even when Dana confirmed the inquiries. It was when I understood that the photos were not innocent in his mind. They were part of timing, part of sequence, part of him wanting the world arranged before he helped my family come for the house. My phone buzzed on the table. It was my mother. I let it ring once before opening the message. I know last night felt emotional. Why don't we finish the conversation calmly tonight? Noah's anxious and Grant said maybe a reset would help. Grant said. I looked back at the photos spread across the table. My own smiling face looked like something borrowed. Then I typed, come by at 6. I set the phone down and went to the hall closet where I kept the metal box with the deed papers, my father's old handwritten notes, and every document that had ever mattered in this house. This time I was not opening it to reassure myself. This time I was opening it because I was done waiting for other people to tell me what my life meant. I set the papers out on the dining room table at 5:30 and then put them back into a neat stack. Not because I had changed my mind. Because I knew if they walked in and saw the documents waiting like a trap, the evening would turn into noise before the truth had room to stand up. I wanted them to begin the way they always began. Soft voices, concern, that gentle family pressure that sounded almost loving if you had not spent your whole life paying for it. Outside, the light was thinning into that pale gold Ohio gets in early fall when the air seems cleaner than it is. The anniversary flowers still sat in the center of the table. One rose had folded in on itself. Another had dropped 2 petals onto the wood. I left them there. Grant came downstairs a little after 6 in a clean button-down, sleeves rolled once at the forearms. He had shaved. That detail hit me harder than it should have. He was getting ready for the meeting the way he got ready for work presentations, like order itself could make him blameless. Lena, he said, careful already. Before they get here, no. He stopped. You can sit down with them, I said. You can say whatever you plan to say, but you don't get to prep me first. His jaw shifted once. I am trying to keep this from getting worse. It already is worse. The doorbell rang before he could answer. For one strange second, the sound made me think of holidays when I was little. My father crossing the living room in his socks, my mother calling from the kitchen to wipe his hands before touching the deviled eggs. That was the cruelty of family houses. They did not stop holding old versions of people just because newer ones had failed inside them. I opened the door before Grant could. My mother stood there with her purse clutched under one arm, lips pressed in that worried little line she wore when she wanted to seem fragile and reasonable at once. Noah was beside her in a flannel overshirt he had probably borrowed from a hamper or the back seat of his car. He smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and mint gum. Hi, sweetheart, my mother said, leaning in to kiss my cheek as if yesterday had merely been awkward. I stepped back and let them in. We all sat in the dining room. Grant took his usual chair beside me, but I moved my water glass a few inches farther from his hand without thinking. My mother noticed. Of course she noticed. Mothers like mine noticed every shift in weather and then acted surprised by storms. For the first few minutes, nobody touched the real subject. Noah asked if I had gone to school to finish classroom prep. My mother commented on the flowers. Grant said traffic on Main had been bad because of road work near the post office. It was almost enough to make me doubt myself again. That had always been the danger. Their normalcy, their ability to lay ordinary conversation over something rotten and make the rot sound rude. Then my mother folded her hands on the table and looked at me with wet-eyed patience. I know last night didn't land well, she said. Land well? I said nothing, she went on. But I need you to hear what no one is trying to take from you. This is not about taking. It's about making sure your father's house can keep helping this family. There it was. The old magic trick. Rename the wound and maybe the wound will obey. Noah cleared his throat. I'm not asking for forever, Lena. But he wasn't not asking either. That was the whole system. No one said the hardest thing plainly. They just built the room so the hardest thing became the only acceptable outcome. Grant leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low and thoughtful. Maybe what your mom is saying is that everybody got ahead of themselves on wording. We don't need to frame this. As I reached down, picked up the stack of papers from the chair beside me and set them in the middle of the table. The sound was small. It changed everything. Noah looked confused first. My mother looked annoyed. Grant did not look at the papers. He looked at me. What is that? My mother asked. The part of the conversation that was apparently happening before I was invited into it. Nobody spoke. I slid the top page toward the center, the occupancy draft, then the printed emails behind it, then beside them a legal pad where I had written the date and time of my call with Dana Keller that morning, because once I started putting things in order, I found I wanted them in order, all the way. My mother frowned at the pages as if paperwork itself were a personal insult. Noah glanced at Grant, not even trying to hide it. And there, in that little instinctive look, was half the story. Grant finally spoke. Lena, this is not the way to do this. I looked at him. No. The way you chose was anniversary photos and dinner. He drew in a breath. You are being unfair. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was so predictable. It brought a strange calm with it. I found the draft yesterday, I said, looking at my mother now. Then I found the emails Grant printed and clipped behind it. Then I called the county office this morning. I tapped the pad with one finger. Dana Keller confirmed he contacted them directly about transfer structures tied to my address before we ever sat down for dinner. My mother's face changed, just slightly. Not shock. Recalculation. Grant spoke before she could. I contacted them to understand options. I've already explained that. You explained it to me, I said. You did not explain it to them. I picked up the first email and read aloud the line I had memorized by noon. In a situation where the current titled owner is amenable but prone to emotional delay when approached too early. The silence after that was so clean it felt scrubbed. Noah blinked. My mother turned slowly toward Grant. He looked as if someone had undressed him without touching him. That is being taken out of context, he said. I set the paper down. Tell me the context that improves it. He opened his mouth and closed it. My mother's voice came out thin. Grant. I had heard that tone from her before but never directed at him. It did not give me pleasure the way I used to imagine it would if the world ever tilted. Mostly it made me tired. I was trying to avoid exactly this, he said, and his voice had gone flatter and now the softness draining out because it was no longer helping him. Your mother was worried. Noah needed stability. I knew if the conversation started too early, Lena would get emotional and dig in before we even understood what was possible. There it was. Not the whole truth, but enough of it. Not a misunderstanding. Not poor wording. A strategy. My mother stared at him, then at me. Lena, I didn't know he phrased it like that. But you knew he was asking. She did not answer immediately, and in that pause a lifetime arranged itself. The rides I gave Noah when I was 17 because his license had been suspended and Dad was working. The grocery runs after Dad died when my mother was too numb to shop. The repairs I paid for on this house before I had finished paying off my own student loans. Every act offered, then remembered as duty. Noah rubbed the back of his neck. Okay, maybe Grant got too involved, but that doesn't change the point. I'm trying to get on my feet. It would help to have an address that's solid. And, you have an address, I said. His face hardened. You know what I mean. Yes, I said quietly. I do. I know exactly what you mean. You mean you wanted the stability of something that belongs to me without having to live under the truth that it belongs to me. My mother flinched like I'd slapped him. Don't talk to your brother that way, she said automatically. And because it was automatic, because even now that was the instinct she reached for first, something inside me finally stopped straining toward fairness that had never been mutual. "No," I said. "You don't get to do that tonight." My own voice surprised me. It wasn't loud. It was cleaner than I had ever heard it. "You do not get to sit in my house and correct my tone when the plan was to pressure me into surrendering it while calling me generous. You don't get to pretend this was about family when the whole structure depended on me being too polite to call it what it was." My mother's eyes filled. In other years that would have undone me. It didn't now. Not because I hated her. Because I was too finished being rearranged by her sadness. This house is not a family symbol whenever someone else needs something, and my burden whenever maintenance is due, I said. Dad left it to me. Not because Noah matters less, not because you matter less, because he trusted me, and if I had said yes to helping Noah on my own terms, that would have been one thing. But none of you asked me on my own terms. I turned to Grant then. "That is the part you broke." He held my gaze, and for the first time since I had known him, he looked ordinary to me. Not steady, not smarter than the room. Just a man who had bet on being able to manage a woman's pain and found out too late that pain can turn into clarity. "I was trying to find a practical path," he said. "No," I said. "You were trying to create momentum so I would feel guilty stopping it. You used my family's version of love because you knew exactly how it works on me." He looked away first. Noah muttered, "So what, that's it, you're just going to leave me hanging?" The question might have cut me once. That night it only showed its own shape. "I am not leaving you hanging," I said. "I am refusing to be turned into infrastructure." He stared at me blank at first, then angry because he understood. My mother looked as if she did too. Nobody spoke for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. A car passed outside. One of the roses finally let go of another petal. Then my mother said very softly, "I thought you would understand." I felt something in me loosen with almost painful tenderness. "I have understood my whole life," I said. "That's been the problem." Her mouth trembled. Noah pushed back from the table, restless and embarrassed, and still somehow injured in his own mind. Grant stayed still. I stood up first. "There is no transfer," I said. "There is no arrangement. There is no more discussion tonight." Then I looked at Grant. "And when they leave, I want you to pack a bag." My mother made a small sound at that, but not even she argued. Because the facts were on the table, because the emails had dates, because even she could not drape enough feeling over timing to make it innocent again. They left quietly. That was the strangest part. No slammed doors, no dramatic final words on the porch, just the exhausted shuffle of a false narrative collapsing under its own paperwork. Grant stood in the foyer with his car keys in his hand for nearly a minute after my mother and Noah drove away. "I did love you," he said. I believed that he believed it. "I think you loved how little I demanded while you were being decent," I said. "That is not the same thing." He closed his eyes once, nodded almost imperceptibly, and left. After the house went still, I cleaned nothing. I carried the photo envelope from the dining room to the hall closet, then stopped halfway there. The old snapshot of me with the paint roller was still on the hallway wall, crooked in the cheap wood frame my father had bought at a drugstore years ago. He had taken that picture the summer before my senior year of high school, while I stood in cut-off shorts and an old t-shirt, laughing because I had knocked over the tray and splattered white paint across the baseboard. The room behind me had looked unfinished. So had I. I opened the photo envelope and found one of the anniversary prints, where Grant's hand rested at my waist, and both of us were smiling with all the right shapes. I looked at it for a long time, then carried it to the den and slipped it face down into the bottom drawer of my father's desk. When I came back into the hallway evening, light had spread low and amber across the floorboards. I took my father's old snapshot off the wall, wiped the glass with the edge of my sleeve, and hung it back straight. Then I stood there in the quiet house looking at the girl I had been, and the room I'd kept, and the last light catching in the frame. It was not a happy ending. My marriage was over. My mother had chosen a story about me for so many years that I did not know what she would do without it. Noah would probably stay angry until life forced him into a shape anger could no longer support. But the house felt different. Not victorious, not triumphant. Just clear. As if something that had been blurred for a long time had finally come back into focus. I rested my hand against the hallway wall and listened to the old place settle around me, wood answering evening the way it always had. And for the first time in longer than I could measure, it no longer felt like I was standing inside a story other people had written for me.